Hello.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're so welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
I really don't really know even why I'm doing this, but it feels right. And I do like to be in these types of conversations. And I think people like to listen to them. But the idea that comes is that I feel like I would like if whatever is shared can bring a little bit of clarity into the hearts and just being of anybody who is listening. And I think that the people who would listen to this are very I don't think they would be new to spirituality. Now, of course, I don't know anybody can click on it and listen to it, but I have the idea even that people maybe are familiar with maybe inquiry, and maybe they've even had for lack of better words, let's say self-recognition. But the exploration in how this kind of podcast seems to be going, how this recognition of who we are, let's say, how that's lived then in life. And really, I kind of know there is no how, but more so I think we can kind of pick up ideas, so we have ideas like, let's say, when we're in that stage of seeking or something, like we're wanting to understand that we're not separate, so we feel that we're maybe suffering or something, so we're looking for something bigger than ourselves, and then to recognize that we're not separate. So we have to kind of let go of a lot of ideas to come maybe to that. But I think even after that, even after there's even very deep recognitions, I think we can pick up a lot of ideas, and maybe they're spiritual ideas. So I would really like to any kind of idea that comes up. Now I don't know if there's anything in my awareness at the moment, but to just kind of dispel, really to just dispel all ideas, because I feel when we're free of ideas, then what else is here? So I don't know. So
Yeah.
that's all that's here right now. So you can kind of, whatever you want to say, you can say.
Well, I know this has been recorded now.
Mm,
So I hope you don't mind me asking.
mm.
I think in your message to me, in your email to me, you said that it's just the audio that's going to be uploaded. Is that right? Is
That's
that
right.
what
Yeah.
you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're very welcome to upload this part of the conversation as well if you want. I don't
Yeah.
mind.
Sure.
Uh, Um, but I don't know much about yourself. I haven't done my due diligence. So
All
would you
right.
be telling me a bit about yourself then? And yeah, you have already, I guess. But
Well, yeah. Even this kind of thing, I don't really think of it as an interview, So even like the guests that I have on, I don't really ask, like, I don't really, this might sound a bit bad, but like, I don't really want to know things about us,
mm,
so like about your story or my story, because I mean, like, we can answer them as well if you want. But I think the, well, I guess it's an exploration. So even this conversation is an exploration in itself. But rather than it being about us, our story or any story, it's more about um just, I suppose, what we're discovering in
mm,
our hearts as what's here that's beyond all ideas, and sharing that just in any way we can. So in a way, it's sharing that through these conversations.
yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I also don't really know much about you either, but you've been I know that you exist for a while. Like, I heard your name, and maybe I might see a quote or something belong to you on Facebook.
Mm,
Um, and I just briefly looked into your kind of about me on your webpage, and I like it. It feels very just. I like this kind of like down to earth, because there's so many different kind of beings, spiritual teachers. And I mean, I definitely don't want to get into judging anything in it. So if I notice that in my mind, I'll definitely want to not buy into that. But still, it's natural to like certain things and not like other things. So I do like when spirituality for lack of a better word, we might find a better word, but is presented in a very down-to-earth way. Like it's not something like, unattainable or far away from us. So I suppose just for anyone who's listening, what I mean by spirituality is really it's like the discovery of who we are. And I know that you call Ramana Maharishi your teacher or one of your main teachers, or really I saw that you just love him. And I think that's better than calling anyone a teacher or something. If you have a love for someone, I think that will carry across everything. But Ramana's teaching was like self-inquiry, like who am I? So I think that's the basis of what I call spirituality. Now I know spirituality can include probably millions of things. But the thing is, I don't think, okay, these aren't great words, but I don't think the answer for who am I don't think that's the end. If anything, I feel like it's the beginning or the foundation. And I feel like that's where I'd like these conversations to come from. I don't know what can come from there.
Yeah.
We can find out. I don't know.
I understand.
Mm.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So I suppose like people, our bodies can be slow to catch on to the message that we're free and that we're one with everything, and that really who we are is you could say like beyond this world and also pervading this world, let's say. I feel like our bodies can be slow to get the message, so even if maybe we go to a retreat, or maybe not, maybe we're just at home in our kitchen having a cup of tea or something. And somehow this like just like you just recognize, okay, like maybe it can just happen even without seeking. But I think for most of us, we spend some time kind of seeking, like maybe asking ourselves this question, who am I, or where am I, or I don't know what other variations are, like, am I separate from God or no? But even after we kind of, maybe we have a deep or some kind of a spiritual experience, the experience always passes. But yet still that knowing can be there in our heart. But I feel like the body is slow to get the message. So then it could be like the next day or the next week or something. And I could find myself in a situation, just like a life story or something, where my body is reacting as though I'm separate, and of course my body and mind and action and life, everything is connected. So if my body is feeling that, then maybe I'll react in a certain way. Like I can find myself like being unloving, let's say, towards someone, or acting in an anxious way, or all different kinds of things. And I think this kind of thing can just kind of bring, I don't really think it matters, to be honest. But I think it can bring ideas of that all of this needs to go or something.
Yeah.
So that it is in alignment with this of what I've recognized. But I don't really know what to explore, because I know that that's not really the case. But I'm just saying all this to see, I suppose, I don't really know, but like to see if it'll trigger something in you as a kind of anything that you'd like to share about that. Like I suppose so there's this kind of human aspect of life, and then there's a I guess there's two aspects. There's like a non-moving, formless aspect of ourselves, and then there's the moving aspect of us, our dynamic nature. And just somehow I like the idea of exploring them together, because they're not really apart, and that's the whole thing of non-duality, isn't it? It's like there's not two. But I feel like sometimes even when we recognize this non-moving nature. We can sometimes call that only non-duality. So that's like over here somewhere. It's like, oh yeah, it's whole. I'm whole, complete, perfect. Oh, everything's good. And like it's like, relax or something. And then there's this dynamic play. But if you keep them separate, then there's still two, really, but there isn't two. Like this actual moving dynamic play is the formless, although it's appearing as form. And I think there's a lot of exploration somehow that can be done there.
Yeah.
Because naturally, like this kind of holds ideas. Not really, doesn't really, but like it can. I think ideas run deep. Like I find in myself, there is kind of a clarity in my heart, but there definitely is also still a lot of ideas that run as well.
Yeah, I feel that too. As in, I feel that in you.
Yeah. And what about yourself? Do you find ideas appear in your human expression, or do you feel that ideas don't appear there?
So I'm quite similar to you, I think, in the sense that I don't really have a fixed teaching. Just like your interview style, you don't have any sort of set questions. In my teaching style, if we could say that,
Mm-hmm.
I personally don't consider myself to be a teacher. Excuse me. I personally don't consider myself to be a teacher, but there is definitely that role I'm taking on in some outward appearance, if you know what I mean. And I just turn up and then see what happens. And there are certain patterns in the way I express myself, the language I use, the kind of things I say. But every time for me, it's brand new, it's fresh. And let's say the teaching that emerges, I don't feel it really comes from me. I don't really know. Well, it comes from me. I say it comes from Bhagwan, but I say everything comes from Bhagwan. Bhagwan is Raman, my teacher, my guru. And for me, as you said earlier, he is everything for me. He is everything. And for me, he is God. For me, he is my guru, my teacher. He's given me everything I've ever had. Spiritually, materially, everything. Pleasure, pain, suffering, realization, everything comes from him. For me, that's the way I consider it. So he's also the essence of what I am, myself. When I talk to you, it's like I'm talking to Bhagwan. So I see him in you. Well, I don't really see him in you, but when I put it in words, that's how I can say it. I don't think that when I'm talking to you. It's just everything is him. So that might sound quite strange to some people. And the reason I say that is because I know for most of my spiritual journey, I would have probably rejected what I just said to you just now. I would have sort of just thought that was spiritual mumbo jumbo. Mm-hmm. Because for me, when I was seeking, when I was searching, I wasn't interested in a guru. I wasn't interested in meeting a teacher. I wasn't, because to me that was a power imbalance. That's elevating somebody else. And rather than discovering something for yourself, which is what always attracted me, I always wanted to discover for myself. So great inspiration for me was someone like the Buddha, who didn't have a guru, who discovered by himself. He went to all these different teachers and was unable to accept, or was unable to find realization in the teachings that were presented to him. And so found a deep truth for himself that wasn't reliant on belief, dogma, tradition, guru, disciple, this kind of thing. He found like a scientific truth. He found a spiritual truth that was spiritual and it was scientific. It came from his own direct experience. Almost like through experiment, you can discover something true outwardly in science. Inwardly, you can do the same through some kind of inward process, maybe meditation or exploration of consciousness or something like this. The Buddha came upon the truth for himself. This is what I wanted. This is what I was looking for. But instead, what happened is I came across Bhagawan's teachings. And initially I rejected them. I thought it was just a load of baloney. I thought it was a load of rubbish. But a couple of years later, I came across them again and something else started happening in me, where I started reading the words. And I didn't really agree with the words on the page. I didn't really like the teaching. You know, the sort of Buddhist style teachings made much more philosophical sense to me, made much more conceptual sense to me. That I like those teachings more. You know? But then, so I started reading Bhagavan's teachings, Ramana's teachings, and I didn't really like them. Why is he talking about the self? You know. But in tandem with my mind not really liking it, my heart was opening, and I inexplicably found myself falling in love with him. And I know that sounds that well, at the time to me that sounded absolutely ridiculous. Because one, how do I know what I'm falling in love with is actually him, rather than just a projection of my own imagination? You see? This kind of thing. And what am I doing falling in love with a man who I've never met before, who died several decades before I was born? What's going on here? So my mind was sort of thinking these thoughts, or had these thoughts, but actually in my heart, I knew I was falling in love with him, and that was that, and that was it. And I knew it felt so right. And my mind was thinking these kinds of thoughts every now and again, but it was more like a psychological reaction to what was actually happening. And what was actually happening felt so wonderful, so right. And I just went with it. And then he became everything for me. And he is still everything for me. And he is myself as well. So that's how it happened for me. And that's kind of what I share.
And what I want to ask you is, so we have a human condition, you know, and let's say the human condition is our human nature. So our human nature could be things like, you know, well, no, judgment.
Can I interrupt you there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I know that's kind of what you're saying before I started speaking as well.
Yeah.
We have a human side, we have a spiritual side. Do we have a human side?
Well, yeah, we do. We have a human condition. A human condition is.
I would say.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt again. I would say there is no human side. There's only the spiritual.
Yeah, so it could be that it's not like that. It's right for me to say the human side, and it's not right that you say the spiritual side. They're just different ways of saying the same thing. You know, so I do see that, and of course, there is the human is the spiritual as well, but just for being able to communicate in a clear way that most people understand.
Sure.
So it's not
I was just trying to challenge you, but I do understand. I do totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah, it's okay.
I,
I'm open to challenge. So,
I just want to challenge that notion because I know what you're saying, that there is
yeah.
the human side. You have to deal with all the emotions and the happenings of the human body on one hand.
So
You've got to,
people call that the human condition, don't they?
yeah, you're right, absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so they've got to feed themselves, they've got to clothe themselves. They may
Yeah.
have ups and downs of life,
Yeah.
relationships, politics,
Yeah.
whatever it is that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
And then there's a spiritual journey as well. So I understand what you
Yeah.
mean.
And of course, the whole point is to bring them together in a way and to not have them separate. And
Mm,
already we don't have to bring them together because they aren't separate. But
mm,
that's the whole point, dispelling ideas. But the question was, when human things arise, like how do you, I don't know, for lack of better words, how do you deal with that? Like
yeah.
let's say your wife comes home and starts uh kind of getting angry with you because you didn't feed the kids.
Mm.
I don't know. I'm not great at thinking of stories, or you can think of a better story if you want, but something like that.
Yeah.
Or someone
Yeah.
is angry at you because you didn't behave in a particular way. Now, I know the only way, really, the thing is, it's if we have conditioning. And
Mm,
maybe I'm wrong in this, but most of us, a very high percentage of the population, have conditioning and will always have conditioning right up to the end. So
yeah.
it doesn't mean that they're ruled by their conditioning. And of course, that's the whole point of spirituality, is that we don't want to be ruled by our conditioning, you know.
Mm.
Um, so I guess, yeah, how do you think about conditioning, or do you think it's a thing? Do you just completely ignore it? Do you there's this kind of idea of embodiment, or meeting everything as it comes and allowing yourself to feel it, to really, there's a million different ideas. Some
Yeah.
people just completely look away and say, it's not there, it's not who I am, it's not, it's just a
Yeah.
story, so I'm interested to see what your approach to conditioning is.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
yeah, I think most people in the world have been conditioned. There's a rare few people who maybe never let that touch them. Um, and I don't think even Ramana Maharshi is one of those. He's also had conditioning
Mm.
as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. So everybody has conditioning. Everybody has conditioning. As a body, there's no freedom from conditioning at all. There's zero freedom from conditioning.
mm,
The body itself is conditioning.
mm,
What does conditioning mean? Let me explain how I'm using the word. Conditioning comes from the word conditions. If something has arisen from previous conditions, that's conditioning. Yeah. So strictly speak, so we talk about conditioning as psychological conditioning.
mm,
That's what people are usually talking about. You've got psychological conditioning.
mm,
If you were, I don't know, if you were bullied when you were younger a lot, it may make you have low self-esteem.
mm,
And then as you get older, you carry that low self-esteem through your life, and it affects you. It has an effect. Maybe you're very shy when you're around certain types of people who maybe are similar to the people who bullied you. Maybe you feel more confident around people who are not of that aggressive nature. So that's psychological conditioning. Maybe you were told you were amazing all your life, and now when you grow up, you have this amazing sense of confidence, but you don't necessarily appreciate the weaknesses you have, because you're always told how amazing you are. So that's another form of conditioning. We can call the first one negative conditioning, the second one positive conditioning. And this is conditioning on the psychological level, and the way the psychology interacts with the brain and the body and the nervous system and the endocrine system, etc. And all the systems of the body, actually. This is conditioning, but there's not just psychological conditioning. There's what we can call physical or genetic conditioning. Conditions are due to our environment. One aspect of our environment is the way we're brought up, our social environment. But there's also our nutrition environment. What your nutrition you eat, that will condition you in a certain way. Maybe if you eat certain types of foods, it will affect your personality. Maybe if you're starving, it will affect your personality, your brain, your body, your physicality. There's also your genetics. That conditions you. The fact that we can speak to each other, we can only do that because of our genetic conditioning. Genetically, we are Homo sapien. We're human beings. We're not birds. We're not monkeys. We're not, not non-human monkeys, at least. We're not dolphins. We are human beings. And so our entire body is conditioned. It's a result of cause and effect. That's what conditioning means. Conditioning means it's the interplay of cause and effect, creating more actions, cause and effect. In Sanskrit, the word is karma. Karma means action. It literally means to do or to act. That's what karma means. And it also means action and the results of action, also known as cause and effect. So this is conditioning. Conditioning is karma. And everyone has karma. If you're a human being, the color of your hair is due to a whole host of things that has happened in your ancestors. The shape of your face, the shape of your nose, the color of your eyes, the way you speak, your accent, my accent, your accent. I've got a British accent. That's because of my conditioning. Whatever accent anyone else has is because of their conditioning. So the conditioning is there for the body. It's inescapable. So that's the first sort of grounding in what conditioning is, the way I see it. And it's just to do with your environment, the environment you're brought up in, your genetic environment. The cells have genes in them. That's the environment. The genes have an effect, cause and effect. They create the human body. According to the blueprint that's in there, 23 pairs of chromosomes that are in almost every single cell of ours, apart from the egg and the sperm, which contain half the number of chromosomes. But that all conditions our body. So an interplay between all these different factors, you can say, creates the body and the results. An interplay between all the different objects in the universe creates the manifest reality we see around us. This is all karma. It's all one web, one massive interlinked web of action and reaction, cause and effect. This is conditioning in the widest sense. So then there's a question, okay, well, how do I deal with this conditioning in daily life? How do I deal with things in daily life? And on a human level, there are, we can say, skillful ways of being and less skillful ways of being and more skillful ways of being. It's a continuum. It's a spectrum. So if someone walks past you on the street, and like yourself, I'm not very good at thinking up stories either, Amba, So if someone's walking past you on the street and they call you a name and you never met this person before, and then they just walk past you, you can just ignore it and walk on, have a great day. Or maybe you will react in a different way because of your conditioning. You'll turn around, you become very angry, you might start a physical altercation and get into a fight, and who knows where that ends up. It could end up in a really bad place on a human level. So that would be, let's just say, we could say that would be an unskillful response. Because why? Because it creates destruction. Right? You don't have to do that. You could, an impartial observer could look at that interaction and say, well, actually, the person who was insulted didn't have to react in such a volatile fashion. They could have acted in a more skillful way. And theoretically, at least, that's true. You can imagine hypothetically or theoretically a situation where the person who was called a name didn't react in such a unskillful or destructive way. But then why did they act in that destructive way? Well, it's because of their conditioning, which is because of their life story, what they've been through, their psychological conditioning, their genetic conditioning. Maybe they have a predisposition towards aggression. We know aggression's not just determined by your psychology, your environment, but also by the body, the hormones. For example, if you're a male, as opposed to you're a female, you have different genetics. You've got different levels of hormones in your body. And in certain situations, men may be more predisposed to aggression and aggressive behavior. And you can see that bears out in statistics. When you see people who are very highly aggressive, more of them tend to be men. And that's due to a whole host of reasons, including testosterone levels and things like this. And often people have had difficult upbringings as well. So there's a combination of factors that come together that create this unskillful interaction. So what I tend to do, Amber, is when somebody comes to me, and if they have issues, and those issues are holding them back spiritually, then we go into them and we resolve them. We show together, we explore the cause and effect, the karma, the conditioning, with an attempt to shine light on it, to unravel it. Maybe bring in new, more skillful conditioning. Maybe remove older conditioning and make what could have been a less skillful action or a destructive action, hopefully more skillful and less destructive. Showing someone, oh, you don't have to act in that way in that situation. Give them a sense of awareness into their own conditioning, because a lot of people aren't aware of their own conditioning.
And, on a more kind of practical level, it's often not, the more people get into spirituality, those things are quite obvious, like if someone shouts at you, you don't have to shout back. But, on a more subtle level, people can feel triggered when nothing is happening at all. So inside, people can be feeling, a word that's used a lot these days is trauma. And it's really just, well, I don't know if it is, I don't know a lot about trauma, so I don't want to belittle it. But I think it's kind of another word for conditioning. And often it's like, I think we all have different levels of trauma, so some people have had really quite bad things happen to them in their past, maybe even in a past life or something. It doesn't have to be this life. But often it's just, it can be just things like a parent not having time for you in one moment and you feel totally rejected. And then for some reason you carry that. Maybe it happened like so many times or something, like your father was always busy at work and every time you went to him with an open heart, he closed the door or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But then maybe nothing happens, but like for some reason we don't even know where the trigger is coming from often, but inside we know that we're not feeling the love of God, and maybe we're totally triggered, so if someone comes to you like that, well, two questions. Like, I suppose if someone comes to you like that, like, and asking you, how to deal with this type of thing in themselves, but also I'm also asking you, how do you? And I'm sure it's the same thing, because you can't share from something you don't know. Well, what experience do you have with that, or how do you look at that? Like if anger arises in you, do you just kind of let it flow through, or I don't know, or it might not be now, like it might be from the past.
I understand what you're saying. So I mean, first, when I meet others, that's a lot of what I do, especially with one-to-one sessions. If people come to me, and we don't have to talk about traumas, and sometimes people have traumas, but we don't really have to go into them, because we don't need to go into all traumas always. Because if the traumas aren't interfering with the daily life and they're not interfering with the spiritual path, we don't necessarily need to go into them. And through self-inquiry alone, all these traumas will become unraveled and be transcended, let's say. But for many people, I think though, anyway, for many people, that's not the case. The traumas are upsetting them in their daily life. They're causing conflict. It's causing suffering. And it's interfering with the spiritual path. And that happens to a lot of people that come to me. And there's just an intuitive response from me about how to deal with it. Often when someone comes to me, within the first few minutes, I get a felt sense of what's happened to them. I don't always know the specifics, but there's like a felt sense of what's the conditioning that's operating in them. And I've learned over the years just to trust that. When I first used to get that felt sense, I didn't trust it. And I used to sort of tentatively talk to people about it. And then over the years, I've realized that it reflects, generally speaking, what is true. So I've learned to trust that more and more. And I speak from that place, and we go through whatever it is. Sometimes we'll discover the root of the trauma and deal with it at the root. Other times we don't know what's caused the trauma, but we still deal with it. And we help cleanse that person as much cleansing as they need. My focus isn't on cleansing trauma, it's on liberation, it's on realization, it's on non-duality, it's on Advaita. But I found over the years that a lot of what I do is helping with this trauma stuff in order to help people on their sort of realization journey, the spiritual journey. My aim is always spiritual, but it often involves the material, the psychological, you know. So I do have a lot of experience with dealing with people with trauma. But that said, I'm also not a trained psychotherapist or anything like that. So occasionally I'll come across people, I'll say, actually, you know, you need to talk to, well, my recommendation is you talk to a specialist, a therapist or something like that. You see your doctor. So it's also important to know the limits of your own, well, for me, it's important for me to know the limits of my own competence.
Yeah.
You know, if I feel that I don't know what I'm doing, I won't stray out of that, and I'll say, look, I don't know what to do now. I think you need to speak to someone who has more expertise in this area than I do, who's going to be better. And I do come across that sometimes. And I come across people who have got deep traumas and psychiatric issues. And sometimes if it's low level, I can deal with it. But other times I'll say, no, actually, you need to speak to someone who knows more about it. So this is intuitive working. In terms of myself, it's simpler in a way, and it's more difficult to explain in a way as well. So in my journey, I did a lot of this healing of trauma for a long time, you know, probably for, I don't know, I'm trying to think, over a decade. And I didn't know consciously what I was doing then, you know. I knew I wanted to end my suffering. I knew I wanted to understand myself better and be more aware as a human being. But I was just trying to heal my hurt. I was just trying to heal myself. So I went through various things and started to go on a journey of, again, my focus was always spiritual. But again, in the same way, I ended up healing a lot of my traumas and my conditioning. And does Tom, the body mind Tom, does he still have his idiosyncrasies, his traumas, his conditioning? Yes, probably. Well, yes, he does. Definitely. Now, I can get irritated by things. Certain things are more likely to irritate me than others. You know, if there's an altercation with my wife or something like that, as you know, the example you brought up, then that would create, there might be decisions that Tom has to make in terms of what to do next. How do I interact? What do I do next? What's the most skillful thing to do? What's the most helpful thing to do? Or there might be confusion. There might be, I don't know what to do, you know, because I just don't know what to do. Something's happening and I'm not sure what the best thing to do is, you see? So that's all there now. But
can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Or then you keep going if it's important. But you know, like sometimes people often talk like this, you know, you talk about your character, you know, like Tom this and Tom that, and I understand. And I hear other people talking like that, and I probably talk like that myself sometimes as well. And then who you are, okay? So you're talking from who you really are, and let's say I'm just going to call that right now like light.
Okay.
You know, so we talk about them. So would you kind of think that it's enough, let's say, to just completely detach from the character? You see the character doing its things and you can talk about the character almost like it's a third person, you know, or because somehow for me in my life, the way it's gone, like that doesn't really feel true for my heart. Like I feel like, so I am this light, but I am also this character. And I'm also all the characters, but somehow I have this character here, Amba, but I can bring my light into its let's say, darknesses, it's troubles, it's anything, it's joys, all of it. I can bring my light in there and let that light totally shine through. Whereas, and that feels so much more true for me than to almost to keep them separate. Like, I am the light and this character does its things. This character, yeah, that character sometimes gets angry and I'm totally okay with that. Because you can talk about, it's not like one of them is true. I'm not even saying it's wrong, like, and I think some people maybe live like that and it's totally fine for them. But for me, I don't feel like my heart would be content or happy, or um I don't feel like I would be in integrity with my heart if I was to just kind of keep my character totally aside from who I am. Although at some points I do see, like, to totally detach from the story it's totally is the right thing as well. I don't know. It's very hard to, I know, to put it into words exactly, but I think you get the essence maybe of what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do. I do. In fact, I really love what you just said. I really love it. And I think that's true. When I talk about Tom as like a removed entity, it does make it sound like there's a detachment there. And I love what you said about shining the light shining through. That feels so much nicer. I agree. And that what you said resonates more with me than actually what I said. So thank you for that. I think I was probably explaining it like that. Because there is kind of a non-attachment or a detachment from Tom in one way. Because the idea, because there's, how can I phrase it? There isn't such an investment. There's not a need to protect Tom. Yeah. There's not a need to invest in him. I don't feel the need to sort of make Tom into something wonderful or great.
Yeah.
Incidentally, I do think Tom is wonderful and great.
That's good.
But I think that of everyone. I think everyone is beautiful. I think everyone is beautiful. But there is I don't feel personally detached from Tom at all.
You don't feel what?
Detached. I don't feel detached from Tom at all.
Yeah.
I don't feel detached from anything at all. And it's from that way I'm talking about Tom in the third person. Like if I talk about my wife in the third person, I don't feel detached from her.
Yeah.
I feel an intimacy with her. If I talk about my kids in the third person,
yeah, of course.
I don't feel detached from them. There's total intimacy with them. And same with my whole life. There's a total intimacy. But I would never, if I was talking about my wife, I'd never say I, because it's not Tom. It's my wife. Because so when I talk about Tom in the third person, for me, it's not a lack of intimacy. Tom. It's not a pushing away of Tom. But there is at the same time a natural detachment, in the sense that what was there before was a preoccupation or a fear or a contraction in Tom that was an identification, let's say. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And when that's not there, there is like a natural intimacy, but there's also natural, and maybe detachment isn't the right word, but that the contraction and the preoccupation has gone. So there's not that sense of individuality or need, I don't know, resistance, I don't know what word to use. Maybe you can come up with a word that makes more sense, if you understand. Do you know what I'm trying to say? How would you?
I'm just feeling like when you're talking, it seems like maybe the only problem we can have really is when there's identification. It really doesn't matter if there's like the character, whatever we call our character, let's say, or the character or a character, whatever we call the character, they can have loads of conditioning, let's say full full conditioning. They can have full problems, they can have anger, they can have this, they can have that, or they can have less, they can be totally joyful. And it's really not even different. The only, I mean, it's not, obviously it's a different experience, but as long as the identification is not there, there's not really going to be a problem with it. So you're kind of saying the contraction, the identification with the character Tom isn't really there. So therefore everything's fine, everything's just allowed. That's the only thing really, isn't it? And so even conditioning, it's like, so some people say that they don't have conditioning, that they don't have kind of any kind of things showing up, but I have to say I don't believe them. I think I don't have a good way of maybe explaining what I mean and what I'm asking of them. Um, but maybe there's no identification with the conditioning, so the conditioning is not a problem. And I think that is totally possible. And I would also totally kind of encourage that. I don't know, encourage it is the right word, because I don't know if there's anything you can do to stop identification. Maybe to just recognize the truth of who you are, like, who am I? Maybe that, just to recognize that again and again and again. I think maybe the identification just naturally leaves us. So like you said a while ago, you said, I don't know exactly what you said, but you said that the inquiry takes care of all of that conditioning and it transcends it. And there's a few different schools of thought, let's say, but I would totally be in agreement with that as well. Like, I feel like really we don't need to be concerned with even the issues that are coming up inside us. Just as long as we're clear about who we are, like that itself takes care of it. And different people do different things, so I'm very into like feeling things and kind of looking at things from myself. And somehow that's kind of naturally very loving, so anything that comes up, it's kind of held and allowed in love. But I feel like there's probably a million different ways, maybe based on, like you say, our conditioning, based on where we've come from, our history and all that. But just from what you've said, I think it's just and I don't know, maybe you'd want to say something about identification, or how you feel that maybe identification can be lessened. But I think I read it in your biography as well, that you don't really know about a specific point. Like, you had identification one day and then all of a sudden the next day you didn't have identification. And I think for most people, I have to say, I think for most people it is like that. It's like, and I feel like for me now, I can say many times, or all you really have to know about is right now, to be honest. Am I identified right now? Like, yes or no? And if you are identified, then, use self-inquiry to see, like, use it like that. But I feel, yeah, like maybe in certain moments there is identification, but also it really doesn't even matter. Even if there's identification. But I think that identification just kind of naturally gets less and less and less and less. And maybe that's what life is for. Life is an opportunity for that.
Yeah, I think so. To your last point, at least. Now, there is a way to end identification once and for all. And when that identification is ended once and for all, it never comes back. And that is the only realization there is. And as far as I know. And that is the teaching of Bhagwan Raman. That's the teaching he gives. It's a silent teaching. It's non-verbal that he gives. He's always given this teaching to us. Because he is our very self, his teaching is always emanating forth from within us. And we have the external teachings. We have his name and form. You can see a picture of him. We have his words, his written words in the book. And these are wonderful too. And these all guide us to this. They're all the same teaching. They're all the same teaching of bringing us home. And when you fall in, for me, when I fell in love with him, then that just took away my love for him and then sort of drowning and dissolving into him takes away all the attachment. And it's not a process of trying to get rid of attachments, which is a different form of ego, different form of attachment, but it's more of a drowning in love. It's being swallowed by God and discovering the divinity that you are. And when that's discovered, then there cannot be any attachment anymore to the body. And we all know this. We all have a sense of this already. Everyone has a sense of this. Sometimes it's very much covered up by the activities of the mind, by the activities of the body and the world, by the activities of the mind. And sometimes it's more obvious. But most of us, if we're on the spiritual path, we can sort of access it if we just allow ourselves to become slightly still. You can get access. That's what I call spiritual feeling. I use the word Bhagavan, I use the word Ramana, but you don't have to use that word. It's whatever word you want to use. It doesn't have a name really. So I'm attached to that particular form of expression because of my conditioning, because of my story. I have to call him Bhagavan. I have to call him Ramana most of the time. I'll sometimes say Jesus or something else, or not talk about it as if myself as a person. But for the most part, that's the way I express it. Why? That's the conditioning. As I said before, if you have an accent, that's conditioning. So everybody has conditioning. If you can speak language in a certain way, what, you were born speaking language, were you? No, it's something you picked up, you learned. It's conditioning. So the human body is conditioning. The human body itself is conditioning. That's why I laid out that. That's why I went on and on at the beginning about what I mean by the word conditioning. Because I think that's helpful for many people. They see conditioning as just psychological, not realizing psychological conditioning is just one aspect of our conditioning. It's actually, conditioning is just everything. Everything you see in the material world is conditioned. A table, a chair, is conditioned. It's created by conditions. And if you see a chair, that's created by the mind, isn't it? As in, like that. Even if you don't believe that this world is a projection of your mind, just an everyday way of looking at it, someone had that idea in their head. They've made that into a chair. They created a chair. They have an idea of making a chair in their head first, and then they've created that. They've manifested that through woodwork or whatever. So that chair is conditioned. It's an outcome of a process. In that case, human being. Everything's conditioned. Everything's a result of cause and effect. If you roll a stone down a hill, that's conditioning. That's cause and effect. That there's a cause. There's something happening. It will have an effect. But when you discover what you are, then it transcends. It goes beyond everything. And it's not some sort of, I think the kind of detachment you are, let's say, against, if I can use such a strong word as that, is actually an intellectual position that a mind takes, where they don't want to deal with the body mind, and they push that away. And they say, oh, that body mind is painful to experience. That body mind has issues that I am too fearful to deal with. That body mind has challenges that I'm too fearful to deal with. I'm just going to push that away and become a recluse and hide away in this small part of my mind, and I'm going to pretend I've discovered the self, or something like this. And this is actually a very fearful place. It's a very highly egoic place. And it's totally lacking in love and openness. And actually, it's quite a harsh reality, difficult place to be in. It takes a lot of energy to maintain. Whereas self-realization is totally different. It's totally open, embracing, loving, effortless, beautiful, peaceful, wise, you see. And because it's effortless, it maintains itself. Whereas the forced detachment of a fearful mind, fearful ego mind, that takes a lot of energy and strain to maintain. It's basically a belief system. It's a whole system of concepts and structures and beliefs. And liberation's totally got nothing to do with beliefs and concepts in its fundamental sense. We might use beliefs and concepts to express it, or to help get us there in terms of the teaching is often in concepts. The verbal teaching is conceptual. You know, if we use words like conditioning or the self, or even words like the body, to understand what the body is, that's a concept. So we use concepts to express the teaching, to engage with the teaching, to understand the teaching. But fundamental liberation is non-conceptual. We're not attached to these concepts even. So if someone comes to me and says, I don't care about Bhagwan, I don't care about Ram and Tom, I'm interested in liberation, I'll say, okay, let's go. Let's go for it. Let's talk. Because even though I love talking about Bhagwan and I love sharing that with people, I don't have to. And if that's not going to help somebody, I'll be happy to ditch it. Probably I'll be trying to convince them in the background, you know, to come around because I'm so biased towards him. But I'll try and be open about that too, you know. Does that? I mean, what's your response to what I've just said? Does that help you understand where I'm coming from, or give you an insight into what I'm saying?
Our whole conversation, you know, I'm having all these different feelings, and I have to say, like, mostly I think we have to take the position, or I don't know, I kind of take the position of like what's happening here is most important, you know, and I don't want to be in that place of kind of judgment, but somehow like I'm kind of like making up ideas about you as you're speaking, and I don't want to hold on to any idea about you or about anybody. So even all of what you said, mostly I really don't know. Like I have no argument with anything that you said. And really, I don't really know what this, like I said, I don't know what this conversation is for. I don't know what our meeting is for. And I'm totally happy to be in that I don't know place. But definitely I can, just in the name of honesty and integrity, which I like, I do feel like there is, like, because something doesn't come up every time I'm talking to someone, but when I'm talking to you, something is coming up. You know, and like I can say, okay, this is what it is, this is what it is, but then I'm like, no, I don't know if that's what it is. So all I know is that there's this, it's a kind of it's just judgment. It's judgment, and like kind of like trying to make out like that you're not as awake as you're making out to be or something. But like I'm just kind of leaving that aside. You know, I don't want to believe any idea about you. You are Bhagwan. You are Bhagwan. And I know that in my heart. And you're also saying it. So why, like my mind is putting up an argument against it. But how I approach that, and this is kind of the exploration, is like it's bringing sensations into my system. So I have to just let that flow through, you know. And when you're talking about Bhagavan and everything, I feel like, yeah, it's just like love. I feel like love carries us across everything. And really all these words are just, they're just on the surface. And I know words can help people at a certain point, and I hope that these words somehow do reach somewhere in consciousness, like either mine or yours or just our interaction. But really it's like you said, the silence of Bhagavan, or the love. And what's happening in me is just like the love of truth is totally overriding anything my mind is saying. And then it, you know, it's like when we're experiencing, there's truth, and then there's all this, like the sensations that are attached to whatever my mind is saying that aren't true. Like I know they're not true, but like I just kind of have to let them out in the name of love. I don't know. And yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I would say though that, you know, these judgments that come up, they are valid, you know, they might not be false, you know. So because you know, discernment's important. And what I see a lot of people that come to me is a lacking of discernment. And discernment is a form of judgment. And that's fine, you know. So I would also encourage you to follow your intuition on these things. You know, if you feel, for example, you know, what I'm saying is not true or something like that, I think it's really good to sort of explore that, you know, not just dismiss that, because that's also your bullshit detector, you know.
But it's not even that. It's not even that. Like what you're. I totally agree with what you're saying. It's not even that what you're saying is untrue. And I do think it's important to be able to discern what's right and wrong. But it's more just like a way of being. So like a way of being in the world, and a way of being that is in integrity with who I am, is to not judge. You can be whoever you want to be, even if you're totally full of spiritual ego. This is what my mind is saying. Okay. Even if you're totally full of like spiritual ego, or even if I meet someone who's totally arrogant, if they're like totally arrogant, like they can be like that. Like, who am I to say it's wrong anyway? Who am I to say like they shouldn't be like that or anything? So I'm more interested in that, and to like totally allow everything, and also recognizing that my mind doesn't know how to judge, and my mind doesn't know, and I don't know anything about you, and it's not really about you, because we have to bring everything back to ourselves. And I really like that as a teaching, to bring everything back to ourselves, so we can use, any teacher that we hear speaking, we can use their words and then check to see if it feels right for us. But ultimately, like just exactly like what you said, like we have to use our own intuition to guide us. And I feel like any good teacher is really pointing to the teacher inside ourselves. Just like you also said, like you're finding that Bhagavan is here in your heart as yourself. And that's what we have to find to guide us. So the words aren't always going to sound right, even if you're totally, completely clear, which you are. Everybody is. Everybody is God. Everybody is God, but everybody doesn't speak the words of God. So the words are never going to match up. The words are never going to be 100% right, because they can't be. So the only reason I just said that, like I usually wouldn't even say it, but I don't know. It's important for me to be open and honest, and I totally love you. And I totally I'm very grateful and appreciate your sharing today. And there's no even though like I was a little bit in that place of kind of judgment for some reason, I don't know why. It's just, I guess life is using you to trigger that in me. So I'm grateful for that.
You're very welcome. I'm very happy to trigger you as often as you
yeah.
No, I do think that's a wonderful attitude. If you can, anything that comes in your life, bring it back to yourself and see how it's a way of helping you grow, or helping you discover any conditioning, any issues you have. That's certainly my approach as well for myself.
Yeah.
I do the same. And I'm going to say it, Tom does the same. Tom does the same, and it's true. Tom does the same, I do the same. Sorry to talk about myself in the third person. Sometimes it feels very right for me to do that.
It does.
And other times it doesn't,
Mm-hmm. I also do it as well. So.
Yeah, but it's nice to sort of explore it, and I think it's also nice to explore judgment as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if you have time, I'd like to briefly. I don't know if you have time.
Sure, I can have a few more minutes. Maybe 7 minutes.
Okay, yeah. Because with judgment, if you meet somebody, say, and you gave this example just a few moments ago. If you meet someone who's very arrogant, you can you might identify that they're arrogant. You see, you might, if you meet someone who's very rude or very aggressive, you might identify, you might realize, you might see that they're being rude or they're being aggressive. So that's identifying what's going on. It's like seeing somebody's shirt and realizing, oh, that's a pink shirt,
Yes,
and you say, oh, you've identified that they're wearing a shirt and that it's pink in color. So you're identifying things. That's a form of that we could call that judgment, in the sense of you're identifying what something is. And then someone might say, actually, it's not pink, it's actually purple color. Can you see? And then you look at it more closely and go, oh yeah, you're right, it is purple, it's not pink. So you're changing your judgment of what color that shirt is. So that's a form of judgment in the sense you're identifying a phenomenon that's occurring. But it's not a judgment in terms of, oh, no, he's not allowed to wear a pink shirt. She's not allowed to wear a pink shirt. That's wrong. You should never wear a pink shirt. So it's not a moral judgment. It's an identification of a phenomenon that's occurring. So that kind of judgment is very important for the mind. That's discernment. So if you see someone acting in an arrogant way, or a rude way, or an aggressive way, your mind's able to discern that, judge that. You say, oh gosh, that person's been really rude. And there might be a part of you that doesn't like it. And so you can identify that phenomenon as well. And I don't like that. I don't want to be around that person. But then there's not necessarily a judgment in terms of, oh, this person's evil. This person's sinful. It's more like, oh, I see this is a product of cause and effect. I don't know what this person's been through in their life. I don't know why they're acting the way they are. But, this is the way it is for them. And I'm not here to judge them, meaning I'm not there to put them down. I'm not there to put myself above them. I don't consider myself to be superior to them. Do you know what I mean? Mm. You might see someone, just explore it a bit further, you might see someone wearing a pink shirt and you might think, gosh, I hate that pink shirt. That's awful. Mm. That's okay, you see. You've realized, you've discerned a phenomenon. First, that they're wearing a pink shirt. And the second phenomenon you've discerned is that you really don't like that pink shirt. Mm. But at the same time, you're not saying, you're not forcing to take that shirt off or anything like that, so that kind of, the word judgment has different meanings. One is like a moralistic judgment where you think you're better than them. Mm. The other one's actually discernment of a phenomenon. Oh, that person's deluded. Oh, that person thinks they're really spiritual, but they're not really. I can see through them, Mm. So that kind of discernment is very important, I would say, on the spiritual journey, because that's how you separate the wheat from the chaff. That's how you discern, gold from the impurities. That's how you discover spiritual teaching in a way. That's a part of how you discover, at least. It can be. There's so many spiritual teachings out there. I'm sure some of them you think are wonderful and some of them you think are not so wonderful for you. They may be wonderful for other people. Pink shirts might be great for other people, but maybe you don't want to wear them. And or maybe you can see the limitations of certain spiritual teachings, not judging them. You're not thinking, oh, I'm better than them. No, it's all one, right? And what you might think as being a deficient spiritual teaching might be useful to someone else, depending where they are.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what I wanted to share, really, with that.
Yeah, it's very true. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. That was very important.
Okay. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you so much for meeting with me today, Tom.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me here. And thank you very much as well for your wonderful presence. I really appreciated you and your honesty and your integrity and the way you express yourself. I really appreciated that.